So the first step of deciding where you want to go fossil hunting is figuring out A, where you can get to, and B, what you want to fossil hunt for. Depending on your ability to travel, it may restrict what you're actually able to fossil hunt for. For the UK-based users and fossil hunters, there's this fantastic website called ukfossils.co.uk/locations that has an entire map of the UK. And then if you click on the area that you'd like to, I'm going to pick Yorkshire because it's my local area. You can then read about the different locations and find one that suits you. So part of this will be accessibility in terms of, are you able to drive there? Are you able to walk there? Once you're at the site, can you walk up and down the steps? Is it suitable for children? This website has a lot of this sort of information. So it tells you how to drive there. It tells you about the types of finds, the accessibility for children, how you get to and from, in this case, the parking lot down onto the beach, and what sort of fossils you can find, and even some of the fossil examples and the geology. It's an incredibly good resource. It may not be the only resource available to you, and it's not extensive. So there are other things you need to consider. So some places like quarries will have access restrictions that are beyond what you might see on here in terms of safety equipment, and they may be restricted to certain times of year, certain times of day when they're working, and that may require further information from the actual active quarry site. Tides are a major factor to consider when it comes to fossil hunting on the coast. They're responsible for washing many fossils from below the cliff, but they're a major safety hazard in their own right. The tide comes in, has a period of slack high water, then goes out before again turning and coming back in. It takes a bit over 6 hours from high to low, or low to high, so that we never get 2 complete cycles in a day. In the UK, we have fairly large ranges in tides. A small tide can still be over 2 meters difference between low and high tide. 6 meters is not unheard of in Yorkshire, and in the Severn estuary where Oss Cliff is, 12 to 13 meters can occur. This range can also be deceptive, as many beaches have gentle slopes, so the sea can engulf large pieces of land with small changes, and makes being aware of the tides incredibly important to avoid being cut off. Before you go onto the beach, do check the tide times for your locale. There are a variety of websites which offer tide forecasts for the week ahead, and several places offering longer-term predictions. The safest times are usually 2 hours either side of low tide, although some locales may allow you longer on the beach. It's better to start safe, and you can always extend your visits in the future. Getting tides wrong is probably the thing that most people get into trouble with when they go on fossil hunting. If you get it wrong, the best case is you can't access the beach. The worst case is you get trapped and you may need rescue. The Coast Guard is a government service in the UK, but the RNLI is a charity, and you are therefore taking services away from others who might need them due to your poor planning. The other thing that is worth paying attention to is the weather forecast for the day or the dates that you're going. Not only does this determine what clothes you need to wear, but will also help determine what you need to pack. This can include things like your waterproofs or thermals in the case of rain and cold respectively. A good aim for your clothing is that you start hunting slightly cool, as you'll warm up as you get walking and you fill your bag with goodies. But you do not want to get too hot or too cold. Both hypo and hyperthermia can become medical emergencies quickly. In the case of the cold, being wet or getting sweaty can actually make it far worse. So you need to plan appropriately, and layers are a useful thing to have, as you can always take them off as you warm up. Here's what a standard fossil hunting trip set of gear should look like, in my opinion. I go a little hardcore, so I have more than you necessarily need, but it's what I'm going to use as my starting point. So obviously we need the big bag. This is for carrying all your gear plus any fossils you find. The waterproofs are fairly essential. I've also got a little waterproof cover for my bag as well. You will also need a water bottle with all your water or fluids or whatever choice. And I've got some snacks here just to kind of keep you going when you've got a bag full of fossils. If you're not going near the cliffs or in a place that doesn't have cliffs, hard hat less essential. I've also got a head torch up here, just sat on the top, that lives in the top pouch anyway, just in case it gets dark at night. It doesn't always come out, especially if I know I'm in the middle of the day. For collecting fossils, I've got hammer, chisel, and therefore I need the safety glasses, which are here, and I've got some smaller size ones for children if they come with. I've also got bubble wrap for wrapping those fossils and tape for putting back together any fossils I've split. Something else I would suggest, if you don't take them, I've got some waterproof little bags. They're useful for wrapping up anything that might get wet, so wallet, phone, electronic keys. I've also got toilet paper. You can take a first aid kit, as well as a GPS if you don't have one on your phone, not just for keeping track of your location, but also tracking any important finds. I obviously have a very big bag. You can go much smaller. So here's an idea. There's a backpack to give you a scale. If you're taking just a backpack without the massive amount that I have, you obviously have to pare back things, so you need to still take your waterproofs. You might sacrifice the waterproof covering for your bag and take a hammer and a chisel, less wrapping for fossils, and probably a smaller amount of water, because I'd be doing a smaller trip. But that, again, you need to consider how much time you're on the beach and how much hydration you'll need. Make sure that you have appropriate footwear. Most sites require at least some walking, so make sure that your shoes are comfortable. In Yorkshire, there's usually a lot of rough terrain, slippery rocks and rock pools. It's highly recommended therefore you take either walking boots or wellies, but quarries may require steel-capped footwear. If you're going fossil hunting in a group, you need to make sure someone knows who is going. Does everyone have everything? Be aware that if you're hunting with kids or dogs, additional restrictions may apply at some locations and more attention will be needed for their safety. If you're going fossil hunting, either on your own or in a group, I suggest you have what's called a notification network. It's a way of making sure that someone who's not fossil hunting knows where you're going and when you're expected to be in contact. That way, if there's anything that happens, such as you don't return or don't make it back at a certain time, they're able to raise the alarm for you. Weather can change and there's localized weather conditions, so do double check your forecast on the day and keep an eye out for squalls or storms that may appear and adjust your behavior as required. In the ideal situation, you get to the beach a bit over 2 hours before low tide. You know your exit point and you can start hunting from there. You pay attention to where you are at certain times relative to the low tide. For example, we first note where we are at 2 hours before low tide. We can keep fossil hunting and note where we are 1 hour before low tide. At low tide, we should be turning around if we have not already done so. On the way back, we want to be as close or closer to the exit point than when we were on the way there. For example, this mark is 1 hour after low tide, and we should be at least as close to the exit point as we were 1 hour before low tide. By doing this, you should know that your path back will not get cut off before you return. You can always return a bit earlier or fossil hunt less intensely on your return to provide an extra margin of safety. You should also be aware of any other hazards. The major one is going to be things like the tide coming in, but also things falling from above. The cliffs are notoriously unstable, and even in the summer, in the sunshine, there may be falls at any time, ranging from small little shale falls to entire cliff sides. As part of this, keep well away from the cliffs and don't scramble up slips looking for exciting fossils. Chances are there won't be anything there. A hard hat is highly recommended. It might protect you from small rocks, but it does not make you immune to large falls. Act appropriately. Note that the cliffs may also have ledges that launch rocks far further out than you may expect. One final thing that you should do before you go fossil hunting is make yourself familiar with fossil collecting code. This is a code developed by the Jurassic Coast in Dorset and Devon, and it provides a really useful guide to understanding how we should behave on the beach and how we should be collecting as fossil hunters. I know it's aimed for those who are fossil hunting in Dorset and Devon, but provides a really useful guide for those of us collecting not just in the UK, but around the world. And so strongly encourage you to go look for it. There's the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code of Conduct, recording fossils, copies about sustainable collecting, information for collectors, and also about research and how it all works together down on the South Coast. And it's a really good resource in general for us to use. In general, collect only what you can use and don't be afraid to leave things that are common or incomplete. On a personal level, it means you have a lighter bag, but in general, it gives everyone a chance to collect these fossils. I appreciate that when you start collecting, you pick up everything you can find, but you do become more discriminating, and by not taking home all those little bits that are incomplete, it gives someone else a chance to pick up something to start their collection and inspire them. Some places have nodules that can be split open to reveal stunning specimens. Doing so safely usually involves a hammer and maybe a chisel, and hitting the rock along the edge to try and create a crack or a weakness that then opens to reveal what is inside the rock. Some of the rocks are incredibly hard, and when hit with a hammer, they release shards of rock, or indeed the hammer may release shards of metal. Be aware of the people or animals around you, and make sure you're wearing safety specs. Note that splitting nodules well comes with experience, and many fossils will break as you do so. It is better to not split a nodule if you are not sure. Make sure that you're GPS tagging important specimens, particularly if they're in situ. So if you find a piece of bone still in the rock or in a cliff, GPS tag it. Do not dig it out of the cliff or the rock unless you are sure of what is going on. Removal of pieces or partial exposure may make it impossible for experts to find and examine the specimen in the future. If you found a specimen that you think is worth taking home, you're going to want to make sure that you can get it home safely. A good starting point is if it's in a nodule, you want to secure the pieces of the nodule. You can either tape them back together so that no bits of rock are moving around and bouncing off each other, or you can wrap them separately in bubble wrap. All of your finds should be wrapped individually to make sure that they're not hitting each other in your bag. Every site has its own rules for what you can and cannot collect and where you can and cannot collect. If you are unsure, follow the simple guidelines that you do not collect anything that is in the cliffs or the bedrock. There are some sites, like SSI's in the UK, that have very strict rules about your collecting abilities and what you can and cannot do on the site. If you find anything that you think is incredibly important or exciting, make sure to inform the local museums or university groups about your finds. Fossil hunting is a fantastic hobby. Not only is it an incredible way to keep people active, it helps to educate them about past life and is a great introduction into science for many. I've tried to give you the basics here so that you can go fossil hunting safely and sensibly. There's not enough time to have covered every nuance or site, and therefore the final bits of safety will fall to you and your common sense. If you aren't sure if something is safe, it's probably best not to do it. The better we are at safe collecting, the more likely that we will be able to continue this pastime without extreme regulations restricting collecting to only a handful of individuals or institutes.